Good evening. Welcome to a regularly, no, this is not a regularly scheduled meeting. See, you say that every week. A special meeting of the Waterville City Council. If you'd like an agenda, they are on the stool right outside the door. Before we get started, Mr. Haley, would you stand and lead us in the pledge? It's not on the agenda, but I do want to ask, are there any counselors who feel they have a conflict of interest with either of the votes they'll take tonight? Seeing there none, Councillor Thomas, I believe you have a motion you wanted to make?
I would make a motion to take the agenda out of order and take the second item first because it affects the first item.
Very good. Second. All in favor? Okay, under new business, we have Order 124, 2019.
Move to read by title only.
Second.
All in favor?
I'd like to introduce Dick Ranigan to you. Dick has been our bond advisor for, well, 20
Hey, Mike,
years.
can we just get the title of
She
the...
didn't actually read it yet.
Sorry.
In order providing for the issuance of a general obligation bonds in the amount of $5,486,000 for capital projects.
Move to adopt.
Second.
All right, Mike, continue.
Thank you. All right. Dick has been with us a long time, so he understands the city's finances really as well as anyone in terms of what we've borrowed in the past, what our debt service has been. So you shouldn't hesitate to ask him any questions about just where we've come from to today. And of course, the list in front of you, which at one time was a list longer than what you see, and we divided it into 2 years. And so we do have the copy of the second year proposed listing too, if you want to see that at some point. But Dick will focus his comments on that listing, which you all have in front of you, and which we did pass out. And if people need an extra copy, it looks like there's some extras on this chair. Dick.
Mr. Manager, thank you. Members of the council. We passed out a packet of some information before your meeting this evening. Mike and I, and we're on the phone this morning just making some final discussions. What we did is we ran the most recent debt service based upon the amount that is proposed in the bond order. We took a look at where interest rates are now. Relatively speaking, they've gotten better during the course of this calendar year. So if there's a good time to borrow, it's a good time to borrow because interest rates are attractive. The city would, if approved, would issue these bonds this fall. The projects could, depending upon the timing, start before that. The city's able to use its existing cash flow and then be reimbursed with bond proceeds when they come in, probably during the month of September. During the summer, we would get the bonds rated and go out to the national market in a competitive sale, just as we have over the last number of years. Typically, Waterville is issued every second or third year historically, and so this is in keeping with that need. As with all municipalities, they look at their capital needs and to maintain the infrastructure, to expand the infrastructure. Your financial statements show that you have about $93 million worth of physical assets. That's a very large number that you're charged with in maintaining and replacing, whether it be equipment, buildings, road infrastructure, and anything else. And so this $5 million would go a long ways to doing exactly that, in keeping with that plan. And then it's proposed that in a couple of years there may be another issue about $3.8 million. We've run the numbers on that, included that in the packet. With the debt service that's falling off the books now as we are repaying debt that was issued back in the early 2010, 11, 12, 13 period, with the debt service that's being retired, these bonds coming on, the $5.4 million, will not cause an increase in tax rate except for a small bump in the first 2 years. You'll see a schedule in there that shows 74,000 and then 148. That 74,000 is more like around 40,000. That was based upon an old number that we had. So the impact in the first 2 years is minimal. And then after that, there is no impact to do these projects. Certainly in a couple of years, if there's another bond issue that comes along, then there would be some impact. But this particular issue has very little impact to taxes.
Yeah, I was surprised to see how little the spike actually was. I think we were all expecting something much more substantial, but seeing what is coming off the books seems like a pretty good way to go.
I should preface it that this is the city side debt only. It does not include school debt.
Correct, right. Is there any questions for Mr. Ranigan?
Do we have the numbers on how much it will impact our debt service for the first year and 2 years?
If you, did you get this folder, Phil? You might not have, because I think you came in a little bit later. Here, I'll give you mine.
Got one coming right there. Counselor, on your left-hand side, the very first, on the left-hand side of the packet, the other side, I'm sorry, that schedule right there by your left hand, it's titled $5,486,000. The first debt is fiscal 20, the year that we're in right now, the budget that you're considering tonight. That's $74,880. That's a half of an interest payment that would occur in that year. Your first full year's worth of debt service would be about $437,000. With the debt that's coming off the books, the impact next year would be about $148,000. So you have almost $300,000 coming off of old debt being retired.
I find this is easier to look at. So this is,
And that shows you year-by-year impacts.
spending would go up by this much for these 2 years and then start dropping back down. That's the change right there.
So this is. So we'll be increasing our payment by 78,000 or?
The 74,000 that says is more like 40,000. That's from an old debt service schedule that we ran with 2 debt service payments. So that number in fiscal 20 is more like 40,000. You could pencil that change. I'm sorry we didn't get time to make that.
Because here it says the first year is 78,634 and then 148,410.
That would be next year's impact, yes.
Both numbers?
First year, 40,000, second year, 148. Third year on, all negative numbers, which is a good thing in this case.
That would be the reduction
The
in the budget.
reduction.
So just for those in the audience that might have a harder time following along because you're hearing numbers rather than seeing them, one full mill rate on our budget is what, Mike? 730,000 roughly?
725.
725,000. If we were to take on this bond, the first year it would come on, because we have other debt spending that's coming off the books at the same time, the city's spending would go up by about $40,000
Correct.
that first year, and it would go up 148 the second, so that's about what, about 1/5?
Almost
About
2/10 of a mil.
Right, so about 2/10 of a mil, about 1/5 of a mil, and then the year after that, it would start going down again by 124,000 roughly. So whereas as we've been discussing, predicting a massive spike because of the full payment and spending, it's really just a tiny little blip even to take out the entire 5 million.
You do bond issues for a lot of communities. How does our debt service look compared to some of the others that you do?
It's hard to compare one municipality to another, Mike. Geographically, as you know, Waterville is small, so you don't have as many assets maybe as another municipality that you need to take care of. But you're at the lower end in spending on debt, if anything. You're not certainly a large debt spender by any means. You have about 2.6% of valuation to a state assessed valuation, equalized valuation, and you're allowed up to 15%. There's no need to ever get to that number. However, your debt is low in relationship to debt per capita and also debt to assessed valuation.
One question I would have is, and this may not be easy to answer, and if you can't today, that's fine. This is a two-vote process. Roughly, what would it take to this bond issue to shrink those first two payments so that there's no spike in spending?
You wouldn't be able to, because you're going to have,
So if you knocked $1 million off the top, our total expenditures wouldn't.
if you knocked $1 million off at an average rate of 3%, you're talking $300,000 worth of, you'd be looking at $30,000 worth of interest.
Instead of 40.
Instead of 40 and instead of 148. So you wouldn't impact the
It
second year
wouldn't
very
make
much.
that big of a deal.
No.
Okay. Thank you.
That's cool.
Other questions from the council for Mr. Brannigan?
So you spoke about rates being favorable this year. Do you think the rates, you cannot predict the future, but obviously, do we think rates are going to continue to be favorable next year?
You know, that's the crystal ball question, and none of us have that. You know the world that we're living in today, and every day you pick up the paper, every day something different is happening. The rates have been steady, though. The rates have come down some. The economy is doing well. So at this point in time, and I would think out through the balance of this year, I think rates will stay pretty stable. After that, I wouldn't try to venture a guess. We'll have another election coming up. You know, who knows what might happen, but the Fed may drop rates. They're talking about not dropping rates now. The bond market's pretty steady Eddie. So I don't see a big change in the coming months.
Would there be an option to roll the last couple of payments from the other bond into this bond and then avoid a spike in the payment?
No. Any bonds that have been refunded or refinanced, we've done that already, and you can't prepay those that aren't callable, so we can't touch the old debt.
Not even the one that's about to retire?
No. No, they will come due when they come due.
We did save a lot of money a few years ago when we refinanced in 2013 and 15, I think.
Right, we refinanced everything that we could, and then the feds took away the ability to do what's called advance refundings altogether, and so we don't have that ability to do what's called advance refundings. We can do what's called current refundings. However, none of the bonds that we have are up to be called. So we've done everything that we can to either prepay or reduce rates.
What is the deadline for like a refinancing? Could we refinance next year if rates are better?
That's a great question. Very typically what we do is we put a 10-year call in. So at the end of 10 years, you have the ability to either pay off the bonds or refinance them. For the first 10 years, you do not. That's very, very typical. If you tried to put a call in earlier than that, then you're going to pay an interest rate penalty. The rates would go higher.
I'm sorry if I missed it. In terms of the timing, should the council vote to go forward with a bond issue?
What I would plan on doing, along with you and with Aaron, is that we would do the preliminary work in the coming few weeks to gather data, to put together the official statement. If you change your mind, we can just change the numbers. But we could get started in the process. It's about a 10-week process from now until we close. So we'd be looking at something around mid-September on a closing.
Mike, what number was built into the budget in terms of the interest payment that we were expecting this year from this bond?
Well, that's a piece of good news for tonight that we just figured out once Dick came in, is that we built in $112,000 in the budget, and the actual cost is going to be 74. So the savings already.
40, we're saving 74.
No, the actual payment for the bond first year is 74,000.
Right, it's 37,880. The difference between the two.
Savings to our budget.
So we're $37,000 to the good.
Yes.
On what we thought.
Right.
So that line item could be reduced by that, and you would still be safe.
Yep. We counted 2 interest payments how we came up with the 112. But in fact, he told us we can only make one, and so that's a 74.
Other questions or comments from the council?
One of the items on your agenda for next week in regards to the bond issue is a resolution that authorizes the city to spend money ahead of actually receiving the bonds. And you're familiar with that process because we've got our street light conversion starting up very, very soon. Matter of fact, some of the parts are already here. So we're going to start spending money on the street light work without having the bond money here. But if we adopt that resolution next week, we're allowed to backtrack and claim those expenses, right?
That's exactly correct. So you can use, you will not use the tax exempt status of the bonds by spending money early. You reimburse your general fund cash when the bond proceeds come in. It's called a resolution of intent to issue securities. If you never issue the securities, it doesn't matter. It's your intent to.
Counselor?
I'm done with Dick. I really just have questions for Mike at this point, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dick.
I don't know if the public has this list. Was this in the newspaper?
Yeah, well, copies of that right there.
We do, okay.
The listing of the bond items?
Yes.
Yes.
A lot of the equipment, Mike, that we're looking to replace from Public Works, we had them run numbers on how much they've spent on repairs over the years, and in some cases, they'd spent as much on repairs as the original cost of the equipment itself, correct?
Yes, and I have a copy of that. One of the first things I did when I got here tonight was to spill all my papers on the floor, but I think I've just found that handout, which I'm going to give to you now, because you're right. What Mark prepared showed the repair history and the costs for his items, so you'll see that on the far right column.
I imagine if we had numbers from Parks and Rec, they'd probably be similar
We had numbers.
from Parks and Rec about their equipment.
Matt's got his, they're attached, but it's not the same, actually. He provided the age of his Parks and Rec equipment, but he doesn't give a lifetime repair cost. He didn't have that information. But I know that Matt is here somewhere. Yep. So he can answer some of those questions. Okay, you have 2 more copies to go.
And then, Mike, beyond the cost of the repairs, there's the lost productivity when one of these pieces of equipment is taken out of service, right?
Right. I mean, the fact that we've got to repair it or send it out, some of it we can do repairs. I know you two can share.
I have an extra one right here.
Oh, yeah,
That next
next
one?
one.
I'll take that one. So, Mark is on vacation, so he's not here tonight, but obviously his list is the biggest list. And Public Works, by far, there's no other department comes even close to what Public Works has for equipment. I mean, our fire chief has a truck that's over $1 million worth, but Mark really has $1 million worth of equipment that has to be repaired, replaced every few years. And he does an excellent job at giving you a list of every piece, its age, and what we've spent so far to repair it. You got a sidewalk tractor that's 17 years old. It cost $130,000. We've already spent $70 repairing it. So at some point, you've got to say, this thing needs to be replaced.
Mike, do you know, what have we seen in terms of bids for road repairs? Have the costs come in higher than expected, like we've heard about across the state?
No, they didn't. When we bid it out I think it was back in March, we asked for paving prices. So we pretty much lucked out there with our paving.
And do you know what roads are earmarked with the money that we're bonding for road reconstruction?
I know one in particular, the Shores Road. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the other. I wonder why I remember it. It's something. But there are three others. Yeah, that's true. There's three others. Yeah. Yep, and I don't remember. Yeah, that's actually a year away. Yep. But we have four that we're reconstructing. So the only way that we've used bond money for roads is when you do a substantial reconstruction. You shouldn't borrow money, right, to pave a road. But if you're rebuilding it, and it has a 20-year lifespan, that's different.
And then one of the items that we're borrowing for, Mike, is replacing the streetlights, which actually will result in a savings in our operating budget every year, right?
Yeah, I think it's over 200,000 estimated savings, and I think we should achieve that starting next July. Well, we'll achieve that, some of that in, I don't know, about late 2019, certainly in 2020 calendar year, we'll be achieving savings for sure. Because they should be starting work within the month.
I don't want to dominate the whole thing. But the ladder truck, for example, is really not, that's not an optional item at this point, right? I mean, it needs to be replaced.
And the amount of money you've spent on that, do you have that top of your head? 310 and counting on the tower truck? Yep.
And
I have a couple more comments. You want me to come up?
Yeah, come.
you're actually combining two trucks into one with that truck, aren't you?
So the tower truck obviously is in very poor condition. This week, as we speak right now, the tower truck's out of service because the ladder was stuck in an upward position as of today. Last week, the ladder truck was again out of service because the ladder was stuck up in a position, again, requiring thousands of dollars in maintenance. The week before that, the finance director saw it driving down the road with smoke coming from it because the brakes are in poor condition. The problem with the brakes on the tower truck is because it's so old, they actually have to be manufactured because nobody has them on the shelf. So again, a brake job on a large commercial vehicle could cost $2,500, but for this truck, it's going to cost probably 2, 3, 4 times that amount. We've got a problem with our tower truck, there's no question. Our engine 1 that you spoke of earlier is downstairs. It's been out of service for 6 months. So we're combining 2 trucks into one. I do want to make a point that we expect to see some savings out of the $1.5 million that I proposed. And the reason being is we don't know how much this truck is going to cost until we actually get the bids in on this truck. And I believe you and I have discussed it. We'd really like to ask to use some of this savings in this tower truck, whether it be $1 or whether it be $100,000 to put towards station repair, specifically the roof and the floor. So I absolutely need every penny of that.
And it takes some time for them. I mean, it's not like you just walk down to the dealer and buy a ladder truck. I mean, it takes a while once you order the thing for it to be delivered.
So that's a very good question. We hope to have a bid spec done by July 31st. We would want to give 30 days for people to bid on that spec because it is an engineering marvel to put one of these together. We would expect that bids would come in at the end of August, and it would take approximately 1 to 2 years to build this truck.
And some of these things can actually have an effect on the insurance rates that people are charged in town, right? The ability of the fire department to do its job.
There's something called an ISO rating, and basically where your fire department is evaluated based on the equipment that it has. And certain insurance companies use that ISO rating to assign rates of insurance. It mostly applies in the commercial settings. I will tell you right now in full disclosure that not every insurance company uses the ISO rating. A lot of private companies such as State Farm, they actually use their own system of reporting. So the answer is yes and no.
John brought up the importance of the building repairs, and I recommended pushing those off to the second year bond, 2 years away. We have a really serious problem with the roof leaking. We thought it was a $10,000 fix. The most recent estimate you got was,
Just under 30,000. It was way beyond what I thought it was gonna be, and that didn't even include some of the stonework. So it could be $40,000 to repair that roof.
So there were times in the city's past where we put off projects that became far more expensive. As someone who thinks in general that public debt is a public evil, and actually came in here prepared to be against this tonight, thinking I was going to see a $400,000 spike in spending, and now I'm not. Is there a reason we don't just add $30,000 to this if the roof needs to be fixed? It's not going to make a difference.
all right, no, don't say anything.
I wanted to reply.
Well, that's why I asked him to mention about the expected surplus in the 1.5 million purchase. We don't really think it's 1.5 million, we're hoping.
We don't know.
And we don't know. But that's why we wanted to mention that tonight, to be able to use that surplus from that purchase to fix the roof. But you're right, there were 330,000
That's correct.
of expenses pushed year 2. You can push them into year 1, as you talked about doing with the library. It's your call.
But we'd still be waiting almost 2 months before we find out whether there's going to be money left over. And so that's 2 more months of the roof leaking, waiting to see whether we're going to have money to fix it.
That's right. It would take a couple months for the bids to come forward.
Yep.
Mike, is it a possibility, obviously, this fire department truck might not come in at 1.5 like we're thinking, but at the same time, you know, if we have a public safety building that is in need of repair, and isn't, you know, to me, it just makes sense. Why can't we use TIF money to repair that? It's certainly a viable option that we could use.
We don't have any left. You have to cut the spending on some other thing.
You know,
We've committed all of our available TIF money right now.
yeah.
It's
I'm
an
just
eligible expense in the future, but it wouldn't help us now.
okay.
Are we using TIF money to offset any of this payment? Is there any plan for that? Because, I mean, some portion of the ladder truck, I assume, could be paid for with TIF money.
Yeah. We did devote some of our downtown TIF money to a debt service payment. I don't remember how much. You don't remember how much of that downtown TIF?
Yeah.
No, but we did, yes. Devote some of it because obviously that tower truck is going to be servicing buildings like this, especially buildings in the downtown. And it's very eligible to say that that's an eligible TIF expense.
Yeah, I'd also like to point out, Mike, I wish that Mark was here. Unfortunately, he's not, but I would like to commend, obviously, with you speaking to him once he comes back, and I will myself, how impressive this 2-year capital improvement plan is, and the costs and calculated costs that he has for the lifetime repair costs. It's certainly, the Public Works Department has been a catalyst for the city for a very long time, probably over the past decade. They have contributed to, you know, coming up with savings in their budget over a elongated amount of time like we have never seen before. Obviously, that gap is closed, but certainly Mark Turner, as far as managing this department, is right on key, and he needs to be commended for that. I know that his equipment, he stretches it as far as it can possibly be. I, from experience living in Ward 4, have seen multiple breakdowns of public works equipment. Anywhere from a sweeper to a plow truck being completely fractured with a plow coming off. I've seen a number of things that have happened with our equipment due to age and due to repair. And it's certainly this inclusion into the bond that he's asking for should all be really approved, you know, in that sense.
I will tell him, because he spent a lot of time putting together that spending history.
Most definitely. And in fact, you know, I see almost everything in this bond currently are things that are of grave need for the city on top of that. So just want to commend Mark. Hopefully when he gets back from vacation, we can do that in a public fashion.
Mike, I would also point out the original capital improvement plan, this is already 1 year behind.
Yes, we lost, last year. We really didn't do any capital improvements last year. We had some money left from a prior year, so we spent some of that last year, but we didn't do any new money last year for capital improvements. So we kind of lost a year. Other questions? Anything on Parks and Rec? Matt is here. I know he's,
It's not one of the big lines on.
no.
No. Parks and Rec looks good, Matt.
Councilor Bofia, you had?
Yeah, so one of the questions that I had, Mike, was about the library, because when we had the original capital improvement plan, some of the items were pushed to the second year, and then those items were moved to the first year. I thought initially the first plan was pretty well thought out. You know, the items in there made sense. Items that we thought could wait could stay for the second year, and now we're talking about putting them back into this year. So I'm not really sure, you know, why is it that we can still wait on those items into next year like it was originally planned?
Well, I know that Cindy Jacobs is here, and probably Tammy also. Tammy back there, too. She's running PK tonight, so I know she can address that. When I sent you folks the email, I mentioned that 2 counselors that asked me to move those items into the first year, but it's a subject for discussion, debate, and Cindy, I know, can address the importance of those. You've also been waiting a long time on some of the building repairs.
So, but Mr. Rannigan, bring it back in here. If we were to slice off a few $100,000, that's not going to really make a difference in our debt spending. I mean, that's kind of what we've discovered. Is that accurate?
We actually had that discussion this morning, Mike. I think, assumed that you might get to that point.
Oh, great.
And we did take a look at what the debt service would look like if you carved out $285,000. I was just looking for that schedule, actually.
The amount out of the debt service from the TIF downtown to 60,000. Well, 30 from the downtown TIF and another 30 from the Lockwood Mills TIF for fire equipment.
Aaron, do you have a copy of that schedule that was at $5,201,000?
Yes. You took them all, didn't you?
I thought that I did.
You got it? Yeah, please.
Thank you.
The schedule assumes taking $285,000 of those projects out of the order that's in front of you, which would result in a bond order of $5,201,000.
Yes.
So the
Oh, hang
impact
on.
in year one, comparing the order in front of you to removing some of the projects from the library, would reduce the first interest payment from $74,000 to $71,000. It would then, in the second year, reduce your first total payment from $437 to $415, $22,000 less, and then it would get smaller as it went down through. So there would be some impact. It wouldn't be tremendous.
It wouldn't affect the mill rate,
Yeah.
essentially.
At 20-something thousand, and getting smaller. In the first year, $3,000 by moving them and sliding them out 2 years.
Okay.
So minimal impact, in your opinion?
Yes.
Thank you. Or you still have more questions?
It's great to hear, because I mean, like I say again, my thing was I was expecting a bigger spike in what we will see in first year spending. And it looks like we might actually have that covered with the TIF money, the $60,000 first payment. So, yeah. So, but I appreciate the explanation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chief, how urgent is the need for the command vehicle? What if we were to deal with the roof first and then wait and see if there was money left over from the tower truck to buy the command vehicle instead?
Well, to me, it's essential to my job function. Right now, I drive my personal vehicle around town. Essentially, it's uninsured. I cannot insure my vehicle for use here in the city. When I asked the question to Linda Taylor in regards to the city insuring my vehicle, it sounded like there was going to be some registration issues because I actually owned it. The city didn't own it. It's an expectation of my job function that I'm going to be available to respond. And I know that there's been some question about, well, geez, do I need a Tahoe versus a police car? I reached out to the vendors, and there was about $3,000 difference between the two. So when everybody hears, geez, this is a Tahoe, this is a luxury vehicle that you're getting, that's certainly not the case here. So the short answer to your question is this vehicle is essential to my job function. It will be heavily equipped with both medical supplies and fire equipment. As you know, I respond 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's critical. And with the insurance piece being uninsured, essentially, that opens the city up to tremendous liability. We just don't have extra vehicles for me to operate or be in during the day.
Are there any other issues with the building that you think by delaying them are causing more damage? When Mike and I had talked about it, the major two issues are the roof, the drainage, and sealing the floors. Those are the priority items. The other stuff, I will tell you, can wait. The other stuff would be finishing the project. Do you know what the sum total to deal with those issues would be?
Mike, I think we agreed that half of the funding, so it would be $150,000, would cover the absolutely needed expenses. Is that correct, Mike?
Yeah, that's the number that we talked about.
Okay.
So I guess why isn't that in here? Like why, if it's essential, why are we pushing it off another? Why can't we just add it into this and then do the non-essentials next year? I mean, I'm just thinking out loud.
Well, I don't think any of us expected schedules like this to come out.
No.
We were just getting the
Absolutely not.
numbers, which is
I
why
didn't study that bottom line closely enough. I was worried about the bottom line of the total bond. Because we started out at, well over 6 million, 7. Yeah, well over
Yeah, it was
7.
past 7 million when we first started out.
Yeah, okay. So that's why we talked about putting 2 years. He does have some issues that need to be addressed, there's no question. Roof's number 1, floor's number 2, maybe.
I would make a motion to add $150,000 to this bond to deal with the immediate needs of the police station or the fire station.
Second.
is there a council discussion?
So again, we discussed about the price of the ladder truck not being definite, right? That it could come lower, correct?
So the answer to the question is I don't know. We need to send this out to bid. We need to get manufacturers' bids in and then evaluate it at that time. But if Mike gives me the go-ahead today, we're 2 months out from getting those numbers back. So I don't know the answer to the question.
Because I would just caution about, I know it looks good, the schedule, it doesn't seem like a great impact, but I would just caution about, adding things, continue, because this is the reason why we found ourselves in some of a pickle in the city, because it looks good, so we say, okay, let's spend the money, right? And I know it's not a huge impact if we had $100,000 to it. I will just caution against, maybe waiting to use some of the money that's left from purchasing the ladder truck to address those issues.
I would like to argue the converse. I think one of the reasons why we're facing these issues in the city is because these buildings have not been maintained, and it is in fact imperative. I'm not a structural engineer, but when I hear things like leaking roofs and sealing floors, I think maybe those are things that need to happen now. I also have confidence in the chief that should the ladder truck come in under budget, he will not take that money and do something, but will come back to the council and present that money back into the budget.
Thank you. Councilor Mayhew?
I was going to ask Dick if our bond schedule shows 1.5 million for a truck, and we spend 1.3, how can we use the remaining?
It's not untypical that that happens. Since this is a council-authorized bond issue, you do not go to the voters. It would come back to you, and you would reallocate unspent proceeds to any project that is bondable, i.e. station repairs. So, or it could be to Parks and Recreation. It doesn't have to stay with the.
Could be roads,
It could be roads, anything. Yes.
So it could be used to cover things that we might have bonded for the next time around.
Here's a question. Could it be used to go towards a boiler for the school?
Sure.
That wouldn't be a conflict to have that?
No, when you look at the city of Waterville, schools are part of the city. It's not a separate district. So, yes, that can be reallocated to any project that you deem to be bondable, and bond council says that it is bondable. So it would be a physical project of some sort, buying equipment, fixing equipment, or infrastructure.
Counselor.
Yeah, following up on what Winifred said, and again, what Phil said in regards to adding to this bond $150,000, I would be on the side of what you're saying, Phil, if it wasn't for a public safety building. I think it's paramount that we take care of the essential services that are needed for our municipality and for structures to be of sound nature. It's absolutely a need that Chief has come to the council many times and explained, I can get by, I can get through this, I can wait another year. I've seen this go on and on for far too long, and we certainly need to address the conditions of our city-owned buildings to the fact of in tune with public safety being a paramount one in particular. So I do believe I am on the favor with Winifred Tate and what you're saying. We need to take care of this, and we need to take care of it now.
Now, we could get, by the next week will be the second vote. We would then have if whatever changes happen tonight, we'll have a second round of numbers to compare before the second vote.
That's correct.
So then we could go back to the public and discuss what that difference would be. Yeah, I'm going to actually take questions from the public if the council is ready for that.
Do we want to vote on the amendment and then move it as amended and then open it up for discussion?
Mr. Payne, is your question on the amendment or on the bond in general? Okay. Yes, we'll take a vote on the amendment. The amendment was to add $150,000 to the total presented. We had a first and a second. All in favor of the motion? Okay, so that was unanimous.
And I will move the order as amended.
Take a second. Mr. Payne.
Yeah, I'll be quick, Julian Payne. Is it worth waiting a few weeks to see if Powell actually does reduce the interest rates? Because I know that is on topic, but I'm not sure either. When I'm looking at this finance, you've got a picture of the city for the next so many years and your debt ratio. Has there been any communication with Eric Haley as to what bonds we might have in future? Because I know there is the boilers. And is it better for us to piggyback on your bond or take a separate bond? Because my concern would be, we say this building needs repairing and it's $500,000. Now you've got two bonds to deal with. So has there been communication with the school?
Well, I do know that there's been multiple public meetings and that we've discussed it and that you've been present at and that Mr. Haley's been present at, that Mike's been present at. I assume Mike and Eric?
I did reach out to Eric, yes.
Okay. And so you've bonded, and let's say 4 years, something major happens, City Hall cracks, splits in two. What happens at that point when you've already bonded? I mean, you don't have really much leeway for any other issues, right?
Well, actually you do, because the bonds are constantly paying down, and one of the things that we've been looking at, and particularly Councilor Thomas, is what that regular pay down looks like and how we can get our capital improvement plan on actually a more regular and predictable schedule, so there aren't spikes, which is why I'm happy to see there's not a huge spike here, because the idea would be so you don't, in the past what we've done is you wait a bunch of years, then we have these huge spending spikes, and then you wait a bunch of years and what we're actually trying to do now is make it so it's a little bit more predictable. So that would actually, that would be part of a future capital improvement program.
But there's no opportunity within that bond cycle if the interest rates drop to refinance and pay it down, is my understanding as well, right?
Not once it's bonded.
Right. Okay, thank you.
And also, Julian, to your question, Pam pointed out to me that the school can actually borrow money for almost 0%, very cheap, a lot cheaper than the city can.
Can you borrow some for us?
That's right. Any other questions or comments on the bond issue? Okay, we will take a vote. All in favor? All in favor. Thank you. And next up, we're going to now move to unfinished business. We have Order 123, 2019.
Move to read by title only.
And second.
All in favor?
In order providing for appropriation of municipal and school operating budgets for the period of July 1st, 2019 through June 30th, 2020.
Move to adopt.
Second.
All right, open for discussion. Council?
I
You want
think
to go?
Aaron did pass out a summary sheet that shows after the last meeting with the decisions that were made, you're at a .49, essentially half a mill increase.
And Mike, just to be clear, this was cuts in spending, not revenue enhancements.
Correct.
Okay.
56.5 on both sides.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. I think Councilor Mayhew is going to have some words.
Yeah, I just wanted to, again, thank the council for their diligence on this first reading of the budget. Obviously, this is the final reading of the municipal budget, and this is, again, I want to reiterate, again, the most important vote of your tenure as a council in this particular, on an annual basis. We decide a lot of different things, and we vote and deliberate on a lot of different things, but when the rubber meets the road, the public looks at us for compromise, for understanding, for empathy, for their, obviously, their personal tax situation. We also have to look at our public schools to make sure they are properly funded and they are meeting the demands of our community. This certainly, at the last council meeting, when I made an amendment to propose the first cut to bring it down to .49, I call it a compromise budget where everybody gets a little of something, but not everybody gets everything. It is a cut that does alleviate some of the pain with the taxpayer, and at the same time, it provides the public school system to have some needs that need to be met as well. I will reiterate that I am in support of the budget as is, as amended the first time, and I do believe that it is the best option on the table right now for a compromise budget that meets halfway in the middle with everybody. I think in the long run, when you look at this from every standpoint, we have to be conscious that the taxpayer has to be the forefront of our minds on everything. There is a lot of pain that has been going around in neighborhoods, in districts. Everybody on this council knows where those segments are and what those people's faces look like on the front doors. I certainly do, and I have great empathy for that. I think it's a no-brainer that, you know, we have to show an empathetic view to the senior citizens, the fixed income people, the retirees. I've had many a conversation with a lot of people on the streets and on the doorsteps, and it brings me back again and again to what the forgotten men and women are in neighborhoods across the community that I've talked to that really resonate with me the most. I put a lot of long hours, as do all the councils on this council, and I have a very sympathetic view to the plights of many, and I've tried to solve problems. I'm always accessible, as the other councils are, and my sworn oath of duty is to take care of the taxpayer and the residents of this community, whether it be in my ward or somebody else's. It doesn't matter to me. It's a conscientious thing that we all have to live by and take our oath seriously. It's absolute, being on the finance committee, understanding the numbers, being a counselor as long as I've been a counselor. There are a lot of things that people don't know from an itemized line budget view, department by department, including the complexities of what it all is, but we are running, departments are running a very well lined, bare bones budget. As we often say, this is one of those budgets. And so much of our funding relies upon state funding. Everything, the ails of our municipality is a direct result from what's going on in Augusta. Yes, can we curb spending? Yes, can we save more? We can do some of those things. But again, remember that the municipal budget is 82 to 83% personnel. You actually would have to lay off a lot of people. You would have to jeopardize public safety services. You would have to carve out teachers. You would have to close down classes. You would have to, in essence, if we were to cut on the scale of what some people think that we can cut, it would actually cripple the city of Waterville. So I think this is a budget, in my opinion, and I hopefully hope that some of the councilors feel the same way. This is a great compromise budget. This is a budget that meets the needs on both sides of the aisle, and I just want to let you know that that's what I support.
Who's next? Councilor?
Councilor Mayhew, he always does a great job, and I got to commend the whole council for the vivid discussions that have been happening, and a lot of great minds at work, and people are trying to do what's right for the community. So last week, when I voted on the budget, not having a final number like Mr. Mayor suggested what we needed to cut, I compromised on a 0.5% increase. And then I went home. I took my pen and I took out the budget. And I went line by line on the budget. And so after I did that, I submitted a recommendation to the City Council. By looking at the spending from the previous 2 years and looking at trends on how people spend, what we've been spending over the 2 years, I was able to come up with enough cuts to be able to get the mill rate to 0.5%, right? Almost nothing. And this was able to do that without a single employee losing their job, without a department being gutted, and everybody getting their salary and their raises. Okay, all that happened. And when we put those numbers together, because basically all the cuts that I went through, they weren't affecting employee salaries, but mostly other line items in the budget. And I still hope that maybe at some point we get to where we can address those salaries, maybe the union discussion, because again, it's a very large portion of our budget. But I just want to make sure that people understand that when people talk about, the doomsday scenario, we will have to close, fire people, we will have to cut, departments, we will have to close buildings and all these things. If you actually take the time to look at the budget, we can make adjustment without any of that having to happen. And that is reflected in the budget that I proposed to the City Council that will bring our mill rate to 0.05 this year. And that number was basically by having the city and the school cut each $158,000 from their budget. And as soon as I proposed the amendment, last year we talked about the doomsday scenario. It changed from the doomsday scenario to now we have to prepare for the future. My question is, what have we been doing all this time? how about we prepare for the future by working on our spending as we continue to aggressively pursue the revitalization of our city and not continue to increase taxes for our residents. All along, I've heard that we haven't been living within our means. How about we show the people of the city that we can do that we can live within our means by voting on a budget that gives a break to the people of the city. Some say that preventing the mill rate to increase this year and next year and maybe the year after is irresponsible because everything will go wrong. Again, the doomsday scenario, we could get screwed. Last year, I was sitting on these seats over there, and we told people of this city the same thing. We needed the money. We absolutely needed every single line item in the budget. We needed the money, and we ended up not spending all the money. All right. So why not trust our city department heads to do the same again this year? By increasing slightly the item line, each line item. Everybody's not going to get everything that they want. Everybody won't get that, but they will get enough, for the city to continue to move forward and for the taxpayers to get a relief this year. So my proposal, again, I don't know if Mike has it. Ask Mike if he can put it on a screen for us.
We haven't been able to pull it up.
No.
If you just want to make the motion, though, can we get it on the computer?
Can we get it on the
He
screen?
was hoping to be able to get a display of it, but we don't have it here.
Okay.
But, I mean, the display you wanted to show is exactly what you just said, a mill rate increase of 0.05, which is basically nothing.
Yes. So.
And it was
158,000, actually, $158,880 to be cut by the city and the school.
Each, not total.
Each, and that's, and just to be clear, the motion, I'm assuming, is to cut spending, not increase revenue.
Correct.
Okay, because that was asked last time, and we had to kind of make sure. Is there a second on that motion?
Can I ask a question first on that?
You have to second it, and then you can ask questions.
Unless it's a clarification.
Oh, is it a clarification?
No, I'll second it just so I can ask a question.
Okay, motion has been seconded.
So I went through everything that you marked, because we went back and forth, we kept talking. You cut, in your proposed budget, fuel for the airport. Do you still have it that way? Because the fuel for the airport is actually something that makes us money. I mean, as a business, I don't not buy iPhone 7 screens because I'm having a down week. I mean, that's something that's going to make us more revenue.
Absolutely. So I asked Mike to send me some estimate, and he did. I didn't get a chance to get back to him about that. The number that I proposed to cut from the airport, right, again, it's a reduction from what was spent last year. Actually, it's not, because last year they spent $13,000 on fuel last year, and this year they were asking for 20. Let me see if I can find airport. Okay, there we go. So last year you spent $137,762 to purchase fuel. Right? I should probably write down the revenue, but I believe we did not sell all the fuel that we purchased. So this year we asking to purchase $199,350, and my reduction got the numbers to $180,000. So it's basically over a $40,000 increase from what was spent last year that we're giving the airport to be able to sell.
Right, but did you remove the revenues from the budget so did you remove $40,000 in revenues on the other side?
Well, that's the question that I asked Mike to be able to get me those numbers so I can see, because he asked me the same question. And I asked the city manager to be able to give me an estimate that will show the changes with and without. I did not get the number, but one thing I can tell you is that after looking at the expenditure summary that Mike sent us from the $56,000 that he suggested that we decided that we were going to cut from the city, you can see in there, right? Because it just goes back to show again that where there's a will, there's a way to find money to be able to put places, right? I was able, just by looking at that, my cuts proposed for the fire department to cut $5,000. from the 56,000 that the city proposed, they were proposing for them to cut $8,448, right? So that's over $3,000 that we can move around. Same thing happened for the police department. My
Can we
cuts.
call the fire chief up here to talk about the additional cuts that you're proposing?
There's not additional cuts. Actually, what I proposed is less than what the city manager proposed to cut from the fire department's budget.
What I saw in the copy you sent around to us was $12,000 cut from their utility budget, cut from the training and membership dues, in the copy that you sent to us.
I'm not sure where you're from because what I'm looking at here is the 5,000. It was 4,500 and then $500.
Yes, Councilor Thomas.
Just to be clear, what Councilor Bofia is advocating for is no tax increase this year while we are budgeting to spend $530,000 out of our bank account. If we did that, we would drop approximately $360,000 below our policy of maintaining 12% of our operating budget in our bank account. That not only puts us in danger in case of emergency, violates the policy that we have as a city, it also would affect our bond rating, which we're about to go out to bond. One of the things they look at is how much money do you have in your bank account, and have you been growing that or spending it down? And if we budgeted every year the way that Councilor Bofia is advocating for, the city would be broke in about 10 years. We would have zero money in our bank account, and we would have to borrow money just to cover our operating expenses. So, needless to say, that is not a sustainable way to run the city.
Councilor, for clarification, I have a question, because I saw and I appreciate all the work that you put into that and that effort. Would you consider making those cuts and then taking the savings and putting it towards the reserve, so when we're actually trying to balance the budget and actually live within our means? So it would keep the $500,000 increase, but then we would not be taking all that money out of our savings account. That's an option. Because one of the concerns I have is that we're constantly taking money out of our savings account. We do not have a balanced budget here in the city, and that's an option, I think, on the table, if people feel those cuts are okay.
And it's a valid point. I actually looked at that, but that's one of the things that I was thinking, we could, that could possibly discuss as well. My concern, is just, again, last year I was sitting on the other side, and what we kept hearing was just, we will prepare for next year. We should do better, we should plan, and we should come up with a plan. And this year, we are doing the same. We are just, it seems like we are finding new ways to spend money. But the great thing, actually, that I believe is our city did a great job. They did a great job last year. They came under. They came under. And for some reason, we don't believe that they can do the same again next year. And we are putting forward, arguments that call for the doomsday scenario. The state is not going to give us money. Everything will break. We have to cut people. We're going to shut down departments. And if we don't reduce the budget, actually, and my proposal show that we can reduce the budget without doing any of that. And I understand we have to plan for the future. The key word that from Councilor Thomas is, if we budget the way I want every year, all right, every year, that's the key word, every year. What I'm proposing is this year. And next year, we can start planning now to continue to move forward to plan. A lot of things are coming our way. We're getting increased revenue sharing. School subsidies are going up. Homestead is increasing. The revitalization is booming, and things are happening. So we have brighter days to look ahead, as we can just continue to ask people of this city to give us money when year after year we just keep spending it, and we don't give people the relief that they need, at least a year break to say, hey, listen, we are going to give you this break this year, but those are the two scenarios that we could be looking at, because we actually have numbers. because we actually have an actual plan that gives us numbers that will say, by next year, this is how much money we're going to be needing, or this is the amount of money that we will not be needing. So my proposal here today is to give the taxpayer, relief this year. Work hard like we've been doing, coming up with new ways to make money, whether it's capturing all the money from our TIF and continue all the revitalization effort and doing everything that we possibly can to work on our spending. I know Councilor Thomas Way, like I told him yesterday, we had a discussion, we pretty much saying the same thing. He believed that we should tax people in order to prepare for the future. I believe we should work on our spending to prepare for the future. At the same time, also continue to work, on getting some money.
So are you looking for an additional $158,000 on top of what they've already got?
No.
Because right now this budget's at 354. Yep. You split that in half.
So, Mike, the number that you gave me, was that numbers after we cutting we already cut the 56?
I already cut the 56, so it'd be 56 plus 158.
So almost $200,000 on both sides.
Yeah.
My recommendation,
158 on both sides.
158 on both sides.
In addition to the 56 that's already been cut.
In addition to what's been cut.
In fairness, the spending's up $2 million. I'm just putting that out there.
But just to be clear what he's,
I'm just trying to get clarification.
My proposal is to cut down 158,000, right? 158.
On top of the 56 that has been cut.
Is there other debate on this motion from the council?
I would like to say that I reviewed carefully all the cuts that Councilor Bofia proposed. They were all discussed in the department head budget and workshop meetings. Every single time, I believe we heard compelling reasons from the department heads about why this money was necessary for their department to function. I understand that there is deep concern about the financial well-being of the city, but I also believe that there is deep concern about the ability of the departments to continue with the fantastic work that they do for the city. I believe very strongly in the budget that we have originally prepared. I would like to echo Chair Mayhew's comments about the budget that we worked hard to prepare, a compromised budget, and one that I feel best meets the needs of the city.
Sarah, excuse me, I would ask the audience to refrain from applause from anybody speaking so we can keep order. Councilor.
Mike, can you come up and give some insight as to what those kinds of cuts from the itemized lines that Phil did and what kind of impact beyond the 56.5 that we cut on both sides would have on a department by department basis and what that would mean?
Well, the budget process starts in February, and that's when the department heads bring their budget to me. In many instances, I make cuts to what they've presented. So some of those cuts you never see, because the budget I deliver to you is a result of having met with them and made some decisions about what's in and what's out. I always tell them you can show up at the council meeting and talk about what I removed, but that budget's already been gone through quite extensively by the three of us, and then delivered to you. And then, as Councilor Tate said, we have 3 months of meetings with each and every department head. And so certainly no one can say that we haven't spent adequate time looking at every line. My problem with what Councilor Bofia is proposing is that many of the cuts come from electricity and heat and things like that, which are pretty essential when you have a building to heat and light and maintain. And as I've explained to you many, many times, if we don't spend the money that's budgeted for heat or for lights, it goes into the city surplus, and that money is available the following year to help reduce the tax rate. It's not lost. It doesn't disappear into the ether. It's within the city's coffers. Cutting the amounts that he's proposed would be a very, very dangerous act, because it would reduce our surplus availability for next year. I think we're truly starting to come out of the hole with having spent down our surplus from $10 million surplus in 2010 to $5 million today. And I think that we're finally getting out of that. I mean, in this budget year, we're proposing 300,000 in surplus, along with the school's 160. That's 460. Last year, we had 800 in perk money and another 100 in surplus for 900. So we've seen our use of one-time money start to go down, down, down for the last 3 years. And I hope really this is the year when we can say we're starting to climb and go the other way. But to spend it all out and not have that 12% cushion would be a very dangerous thing.
Councilor.
So last year, I mean, like I said, the city departments they did a great job, coming under what was budgeted for.
Yep.
And I believe that this year we can do the same. And we can do the same, and I believe that the department heads can do exactly what they did last year. And that's why my proposal, showed for a number increase on line items. We did not reduce the amount of money that they were getting. My proposal increased the amount of money that they received last year. All the departments across the board, it increases that amount, but at the same time, it keeps a conservative number so that, if there's fluctuation in the spending from what was spent last year, there will be room for that to happen. When you mentioned electricity and heat and those items, there were some items that will fluctuate by an amount that I don't believe, I don't think an electricity bill will go from $5,000 to $10,000 or $8,000 in 1 year, right? Obviously, we want to budget for an increase, but I believe a reasonable increase is something that we should be budgeting for. And I think that my proposal, and I believe my proposal, the proposal that I put forward, does that. It gives enough of a cushion for department heads to have enough money in the event, we see some fluctuation in the cost.
Okay. I would like to know if there is anybody on the council that has something new to add to this discussion, because is there anybody that has a question for Phil or a statement that's new? Okay. Is there anybody from the public who would like to comment on this motion?
Hi, I'm Sandy Sullivan, Ward 5, and it's not particularly about this motion. It is about the discussion in general. I was not able to attend the first reading, and so I watched the video. I would like to thank profusely Phil Bofia for the work you have done line by line. How could you possibly expect him or any of you to approve a budget, including the school budget, unless he has looked at it line by line? Someone may have slipped in a trip to Florida. Does he know whether that trip to Florida is business or they're going to take their wife on vacation? And so the only way you know that is to look at the budget line by line. Thank you for the hard work you have done for the citizens. I don't think some of the rest of you have done that.
Tom Nail, Ward 1. I'd like to start by echoing some of the sentiments that Sydney brought up at the top, and that is that what you guys are doing right now, I think, is easily the hardest part of your job, and it's also the most important. And some of the difficulties I think that you guys face are the difficulties that we face throughout the city, and that is that geographically we're small. And in addition to that, there is a significant part of the population, not the population, but of the landmass that is tax exempt for a variety of nonprofits. And what that does is that creates a revenue issue, but it also brings into question what we're going to do from the standpoint of spending. and it is a very big deal. Now, I understand that the composition on this board is 5 Democrats and 2 Republicans. And what I'm about to say is not to denigrate the Republicans in any way, shape, or form. I'm not suggesting that you do not care about the folks that I'm about to talk about. I'm sure that you do very much. And in fact, the sentiments that both of you have raised suggest that you do. But specifically to the 5 Democrats, like myself, I think a big part of our platform is being concerned about your middle class, your working poor, your retired, your fixed income individuals, and your low income individuals. And understanding that there are certain things that simply cannot be cut. We have to understand that those folks are the ones that get hit hardest by these tax increases. And I understand that what you're really looking at this year, this mill rate increase would be about a 1.92% increase up from where we were last year. But you also have to understand that in the context of what we just did for a tax increase, which was 8.3% last year, and then when you look at the overall spending that we have as a community from the 16-17 budget to today, that's a 14% increase in spending. And Eric Thomas made a very good point earlier, which is if we continue to cut at our rainy day fund, our surplus, whatever it is, that's not sustainable. But I would also submit that having an increase in your overall spending of 14% every 3 years probably also is not sustainable. Because if we do that, then where we're going to be in 3 years is we're going to be at a $49 million budget. Augusta, which has twice as many people as we do, spent, I believe, $61 million this past year. And I think that we can all agree that that type of increase in spending is not sustainable. I am not saying that what the 7 of you have to do is easy. But what I am saying is that it's on a certain level you can kind of look at the situation and say, well, we've got doctors and lawyers and business owners, and they'll be able to manage this. And you're probably right. They probably can. But when you look at our retirees, when you look at our lowest income individuals, when you look at our most vulnerable people, and that's the people that, especially as Democrats, we are supposed to care about. Those are the people we are supposed to be looking out for. Those are the ones that are going to battle. Those are the ones that are going to deal with the brunt of this the worst, to a point where, and I've spoken to tenants, and I've spoken to clients, and I've spoken to people in the community, where they're choosing between, am I going to eat? Am I going to have my lights on? How is this going to work? Because, I live in a $90,000 house, but it costs me $2,300 a year in taxes. And that's a very real concern. And I'm not saying that that's lost on you, but I'm saying that it is worth a second or a third look when you guys are dealing with the budget. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I say something?
Of course.
I agree with a lot of those sentiments, but this is why it's so important to remember how much the state's budget affects the city budget. When the state does not fund revenue sharing, that puts pressure on property taxes. When the state does not live up to its responsibility for funding schools, that puts pressure on property taxes. By their nature, property taxes are a regressive tax. Income taxes are a progressive tax. So if people want to see property tax relief, they need to put people in Augusta who believe in progressive taxation and not regressive taxation. In some ways, our hands are tied, partly by what happens at the state level. We have to plow the roads. We have to pave the roads. We have to educate children. We have to provide a fire department and a police department. Those things cost a certain amount of money. And they're difficult choices. What roads would you have us not pave? How is that going to affect somebody's property values if we delay those projects for a year, 2 years, because we're trying to save money? How would it affect your property values if we cut 1 or 2 policemen from the police department and crime got worse? How would it affect the city if the fire department didn't have enough employees to respond to a fire? You can't look at one side of the coin without the other. And so I hope that people take all those things into consideration when they're thinking about what the mill rate should be.
Yeah, I would just add that if you're talking about sending people to Augusta, also look at some of the insane other things that they spend money on before, because some of the, because you can't have it all. So I would question who, your representatives on what the first priorities are of the spending, because you can't spend millions and millions
We have
on...
people waiting.
I understand, and I have not interrupted you, Counselor, and I know that you don't like my politics or what I have to say, but that's irrelevant to me because I'm talking. You didn't interrupt Mr. Thomas. So if you're going to, we do need revenue sharing, but that's also going to require representation that prioritizes spending to property tax. Yes.
Kathy Weeks, Ward 1. Unlike what some people think, I do represent half of Ward 1, minus 2 votes, but Mr. Morse and I work very well together. I would like to echo what Mr. Nail has just said, because I talked to those people also. And the middle class seems to be dissolving in this town. Unless you make 6 digits, it is a hardship. Or if you're elderly. And I've talked to these people, the elderly, that's saying, you know, my medicine prices go up and I don't know how I'm going to keep my house. And that's the fact. And when you're not a property tax owner, it doesn't leave much credibility, Mr. Thomas, when you give these great speeches on and on. We know we need,
Do you think my landlord pays the property taxes out of their own pocket? I'm just curious.
We're going to have order in the meeting.
I do, in fact, pay property taxes through my rent, and my landlord increased my rent this year. And he increased my rent more than what the proposed property tax increase is, and I have to make a decision about whether or not I can afford it or not. And, you know, it's the same thing everybody is faced with when they're figuring out their own budget. But to imply that somehow my opinion is less important because I don't own a piece of property, it just doesn't sit well with me.
Well, the difference is, yes, you pay rent, but you don't have to worry about maintaining the house.
All right, I would like to stay away from personal conversation.
I am concerned about any tax increase, and Mr. Nail is right. The philosophy is this spending keeps going up and up and up every year. And then we find the condition of our police department, our fire department, just on a downward swing. There is something wrong with the spending issues, and the cost reductions need to be looked at. I commend Phil for taking that time and really analyzing it. And the meeting last week was just a total disgrace and embarrassment. So thank you, Phil. But I am employing this council to relook at this and not have the philosophy, well, we're just going to tax those people again. And the middle class is suffering. And the article that Kim Lane wrote last week was about the middle class. So I implore you to really think about these decisions.
Again, I mean, we all work for the same for the same people, and you know, I would say one of the reasons I came to Maine is because it reminded me of home. You know, the people of Maine are resilient. You know, they can make a buck stretch. I tell you, and I tell you, through the conversation that I've seen, I've heard. I mean, last weekend I was out in my yard, and the neighbor came out and. This gentleman walked in the yard with a wood splitter, and I went to talk to him, and he talked to me about how my neighbor couldn't afford to take away the tree that had fallen in the back of her yard, so he was just coming to give her a hand because she didn't have any money. She was on fixed income. Those are the kind of, we have one of the oldest population in the state, and what we do here is important. We have raised taxes, I mean, 3 years in a row? 2 or 3 years in a row, and then we had to we revaluated the house, the home. So somebody had a house that was worth $80,000, now it's worth $100,000. Plus we raised the taxes 2 or 3 times on them. Let's give the people a break. Let's give the people a break and find new ways, you know, to help our city move forward. We can't just do that by just continuing to tax the people. We can do that, I believe, by looking at the spending wisely, and finding new ways to come up with money so that we can continue to grow our budget where we can meet the needs of our city.
And going forward, just for the sake of time, I want us to just say that going forward, we're going to allow the public to have the commentary. We're going to suspend responses from the council. In order to do that, I'd ask if you're making a public comment that rather than address people in particular, that we just talk about the subject topic rather than individual persons, so then there's not a need to respond personally. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Joan Phillips Sandy. I'm a resident of Waterville, Ward 3, and I am the school board representative for Ward 3, but I'm speaking in my individual capacity, not as a member of the school board. I am really quite tired of the we, them, us, they, otherness that I am hearing. You know, when people talk about the middle class, the working folks, the average people, as if you're not them, as if we on the school board are not them. I don't know all of you all that well. I know some of you better than others, and I'm prepared to say none of you are the 1%ers. I don't think that. I think that you are regular working folks. Some of you I know have kids, some of you have more kids than others. You got families out there, you got jobs, some of you have your own businesses. I know at least 2 of you do that. So first of all, I am really sick of anybody acting as though you don't understand what it's like to be a taxpayer in Waterville, because you all are, one way or the other. As to the schools, I care passionately about the schools. If I didn't, I wouldn't still be on the school board, which I think I might have been longer than since at least Meg was alive, although I can't swear to it. So listen, folks, you're trying your best. Line items are a good thing. You have your time to do your line item. It began in February. We do our line items starting in January. We meet with every school. Before that, Eric Haley has met with administrators. We do this. We've done it. You told us to cut 56 some odd, we cut 56 some odd. But to say tonight that all of a sudden you want us to cut another 150 some odd, I'm sorry, that's unfair, that's unconscionable. And I don't think that has to be an us-them thing. That's a, come on folks, that's just plain unreasonable, no matter who you are. Thank you.
Any other commentary or questions from the public?
I'm Mark Andre, Oakland and Ward 3. Last year, this time, I got up to speak on the budget in Waterville as an Oakland resident. And, you know, in Oakland, we have a mill rate that's less than 17. Brunswick has a mill rate less than 19. I want to commend the council on the job they've done restricting spending. I think all of you have done your best. I think the additions proposed by Phil would be interesting to see work their way through the process to see if there are additional cuts. But the primary problem you're having is a revenue problem. And your revenue problem is being generated by 2 things. First is the mill rate that is substantially higher than other places that prevents development in the city and growth of property values. And you can't change it. It's a function of where you've been that it's hard for you to fix, because you have to come up with this additional revenue, but you can't generate until you drop the tax rate. And it's why last year I suggested that maybe it's time for a contribution from the nonprofits. And I think if you're going to expect the residents to bear the brunt of these, I'm not going to say tax increase because it's not much of one, but there was a very large one last year and the year before. In other words, you're already at a very high mill rate that needs to come down, not stay the same or go up. So you need to maybe make a commitment somewhere to the residents. Something I'd like to see from the council as part of this budget is a commitment to make an effort to put the city administration to work at obtaining a contribution from at least the colleges, who may have a legal obligation to make that contribution if you examine their nonprofit status, and possibly generate some spirit of camaraderie with the other nonprofits to get a contribution from them to take this burden off the residents. Because it seems like every year it comes back to the residents and the residents, but this fire truck is going to probably service more property down town here from business owners that don't live here or nonprofits that aren't paying taxes. And I mean, that's a $1.5 million bonded expense for that fire truck. And maybe we just want to get a commitment for that. And there are other areas, you know, I heard Eric Thomas last week talk about fairness with the parking tickets, that you can't waive these tickets and then expect the next guy that comes in with an excuse you're not going to be able to waive it. It's not a good way to do business, and I agree with Eric on that. But I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the results of the Voter Registration Appeals Board hearings, but we had probably 85 to 90% of the individuals that came in to testify that have not followed through on residency in our community. Now, that has very big impacts, not only for Waterville, but the state budgets.
Mark, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap it up now.
Sure. We have registration fees for vehicles, excise taxes, license fees, the whole 9 yards. We had 800 people register to vote, and 90% of them haven't actually become residents and began paying taxes in our town, and I'd like to see the council address that.
I agree with you 100% on that, but I got to cut you off. Is there anybody else?
Julian Payne, Ward 5. I'm speechless. Thank you. Nothing to say.
Okay. Councilor, do you have something new to add? Because I don't want to have another 5 minutes of the same thing. And I'm not saying that to be personal. I just, we do need to wrap up.
Yeah, just one little statement. I mean, to the statement of Mr. Andre, believe that a mill rate is too high. What I've heard is that a mill rate is too low, and it should go higher. And I think that is absolutely crazy. And I don't think our mill rate is too low. I think, like many, is too high. So I would like for it to stay the same as it was, at least for this year.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the council before I close debate on this motion? Okay, I'm going to take a vote on Phil's motion. All in favor? All opposed? Now we are back to speaking about the budget. Is there anybody else who has a comment on the budget as it is? Yes.
Mike, am I correct that as the budget sits right now, we received an email today that said this would drop us $103,000 below our policy of maintaining 12%, but that doesn't actually include the $70,000 in additional surplus spending that so it actually drops us $173,000 below, depending on what happens with money left over from the current fiscal year.
That's correct. Yeah, we are below the 12% minimum requirement. What happened when we first figured that 12% number, we had mistakenly left out the school's contribution surplus use. But because school surplus is included in the large total surplus amount, they also have to be included in the use. So our use of surplus is 300, their use is 160. That's 460. 460 minus the 350 that we have above the 12% leaves us with a deficit of 103, not including the 70.
Aaron, do we have any sense of where we're going to end up? I mean, I know we have to wait for the official audit, but we must have some idea of how much money we're going to have left over from the previous budget.
The amount that we have can't be predicted. It's not set in stone at this point. Is this one better?
Should be on.
Put it right up to your mouth.
Is this one better?
Yes.
Okay. So the numbers we're dealing with are estimated, and there's no definitive answer until we could get. There's no definitive answer until we could get an audit. The audit won't occur until sometime in December. It'll wrap up.
But you must have. You have to have something.
Well, the numbers I put together is an estimate. That's our best numbers.
Which was 150 to 200,000.
Yeah.
Surplus on the city
For the current year.
For the year that ended June 30.
Yep.
Yep. We finished in the black. We think by that.
Yep.
That amount. I think in the school side, it was
We
very
did-
similar.
We finished, we did not use any of our surplus, so it will be going back in. So that's 160 that we put in the budget last year.
The
We
160.
didn't use.
Okay.
So we haven't used it. So we will not be below the 12% at all.
Thank you.
And we may actually have a little bit more,
Thank you.
okay?
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, any other?
I mean, the only point that I would make is we may be okay, and I know Phil thinks I'm talking about doomsday scenarios, but this is part of our, and I've been through this. I went through this when I was on the city council. I came onto the city council in 2011, which was right after the financial crisis, when the governor was cutting revenue sharing and school subsidy every year, and we had to try to come up with the money to maintain current services. So it's not as though it's something that is beyond the scope of possibility. Part of our job is to think what could happen 2 or 3 years from now. What happened every 2 years, there's a new group of people in Augusta. Those people could decide they don't want to give us revenue sharing anymore. Those people could decide they don't want to fund the schools at the same rate. 4 years from now, we could have a new governor who thinks that revenue sharing is municipal welfare, like the governor we just had. And what would happen then? And so, you know, when Paul LePage was the mayor of Waterville, whether you agree with the way he did it or not, which it's a long conversation, he built the surplus to $10 million with the thought that things can go wrong and at some point we could need that money. And you could argue, I mean, clearly we were way overtaxing people because somehow we ended up with $10 million in our bank account. Was that prudent? Well, it turns out it was, because we've spent that money over the last 10 years. And the exact same thing could happen again. So to sit here and think that just because this year we're going to end up $50,000, $100,000 over our 12% policy means we're all good, like, that is just not reality. That money is for an emergency. That money is if there was a catastrophe and we couldn't collect revenues and we had to keep running the city. That is not a rainy day fund to dip into to balance the budget. That's for any amount above and beyond the 12%, which at this point we don't have. And we could very well, a year on the path that we're going down, a year from now, 2 years from now, there is going to be no option to dip into the surplus. And we're dipping into the surplus to the tune of $500,000 this year. So what happens when there is no more $500,000 to take to keep taxes low? What are we going to do then? You think the conversations we're having right now are tough? You wait until that comes to fruition. So I just urge people not to be, yes, we're turning the corner. I think this is certainly a lot easier budget than the budgets I dealt with back in 2011 through 2014. But to think that we're completely out of the woods and we don't have to plan for the future is just not reality.
Counselor.
For me, I don't think anybody thinks that we're completely out of the woods. But last year we were 1.94 of an increase. We worked hard to get it to 0.49, what it is right now, and we're still going to be at that 12%. What you're asking for is an additional fund in case other stuff happens. I mean, we always say surplus.
I don't think there was a motion made.
I know that 0.49 is not ideal for other people. I know it's not ideal because some want it to go higher, some want it to go lower. This is middle ground. This is right in the middle. We were 1.94 last year, 0.49 this year. Everybody took a haircut, and we are trending in the right direction. It can't always be what's going to happen next year. It will be next year, but we're working on this year's budget, and everyone is tired of paying more. And we always talk about cutting, and we spend no amount of time on figuring out how we're going to get more revenue for the city that doesn't tax our citizens.
I wouldn't say that that's true. I think we actually do that an awful lot in the 5 years that I've been doing this, and I do go through the budget line by line. My concern is that if we were to cut, my only statement is that we should have worked towards a balanced budget, and that any further cut should be to reduce what's coming out of the surplus, because I've sat through those bond rating phone calls with the credit agencies. It's not easy, and if we go below, then you're going to be paying, when we're here celebrating tonight how there's not a big bump and we get to buy a new ladder truck, there's going to be a big bump if we have to buy a new ladder truck. So, Counselor.
I'd just like to make some clarifications here with some different mentionings of things that I've heard here tonight. I want to obviously commend Phil for what he's done with going line by the budget, but I can assure you, everybody in the public here, even though he was line by line from a visual standpoint, every single counselor on this council went through that itemized line by line budget. It's very important to know that every council on this council does the same thing. And everybody has different ways of life and what they cope with. We're full-time workers here up on the council. I can honestly tell you, just like that was said, we are the middle class here. There's no elite billionaires or millionaires sitting here on this council. I wish we could take, in my personal opinion, and I've said this many a times at a doorstep, I wish we could take the D's and the R's out of Waterville and just put an N next to everybody's name, and that's what I say to some of my constituents. I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican, they don't mean anything to me on the local level. I'm your neighbor. I'm your neighbor, and I'm here to take care of you and listen to what you have to say to me. And that's what it really is all about. And I think politics plays a larger negative role in a community than it needs to be. And I'm just a simple man, working man, blue-collar man. I work 50, 55 hours a week. I come home, I have a wife, my daughter's left the nest. I am exhausted when I get home, but I still open the city books and I still go by line because that's my sworn oath of duty that I do, and I know that all my fellow councilors do the same thing. So I'd like to dispel the myth that none of the councilors up here do due diligence, because they do. This is the best council that I've ever sat on. Diversity, analytical thinkers, independent thinkers, and I will honestly say these people up here on this council, D's and R's aren't even spoken about. We all get along and we talk and we have good discussion and dialogue. And I want to commend this council for that, because before it wasn't always like that. On top of that, some of the small bumps, and like Jay has said, some of the, we went from 1.94 down to 0.49. We are making progress. There's a lot of light in the end of the tunnels on a lot of different fronts, but I will go back to the other conversation with nonprofits. We really have to have a stronger conversation with the nonprofits. Services rendered by our public safety departments to these nonprofits is on a larger scale ever before. The ladder truck that is going to be done with this bond is going to service high-rise buildings that are being built downtown and outside of town that are obviously nonprofits. We have to be cognizant of the fact that we have to have serious discussion because, again, tax-exempt property in the city of Waterville, the 13-square-mile radius, 33% of our land mass, as indicated, is tax-exempt. The burden falls on street by street, house by house. And this is why we always have, or we always seem to have, the bubble of a small increase to a mediocre increase that we're faced with. Yes, spending's an issue, revenue's an issue, but certainly if we can explore different ways of finding that little bit of revenue and getting help from the state, I think overall we can dwindle that even further, but I just wanted to make those clarifications.
Great. We're going to continue here. I do want to just remind everybody I've asked for new information to be said. If we've heard it before, please don't repeat it, because in the essence of time, we just don't need to keep repeating the same points over and over again. Thank you.
In the interest of being more responsible with our budget moving forward and weaning ourselves off of surplus, I would like to make a motion to restore the mill, to keep the cuts that have been made by the school and by the city, and to restore the mill rate increase to 0.6, and apply the other $30,000 that we're not going to use for a bond payment towards reducing our use of surplus. That'll be a total of about $100,000. So that's my motion.
Is there a second on the motion?
I will second, so we can discuss it.
Great. Is open for discussion on the motion. And I am going to ask counselors to keep their commentary less than 5 minutes as well. And the floor is open on the motion. Counselor.
I understand where Councilor Thomas is coming from. You have to prepare for the future. You have to be able to build, some kind of reserve. But at the same time, you cannot spend your way out of building a reserve. I think that I don't know how that works, because if I'm going to save money, I have to start by not spending the money that I have, and I will save money. Or, I can't just go to my mom's and say, hey, can you just keep giving me money because I need to spend it so I can build a reserve? It seems like that's what we're doing. We just keep spending, and we're asking people to pay for it, right? And we're not really talking about, we shouldn't be spending this much money that often. And I understand there needs to be an increase in spending, but that increase cannot always come to the expense of the taxpayer. And we've been doing that for many years, and that cannot continue. And that will, again, we have one of the oldest population in the state who live on fixed income, don't make a lot of money. By continuing to increase our mill rate, we're putting those families at risk. Mr. Nell said it well. We have to think about the poor people who live here, about us. I'm a taxpayer. You increase my taxes, it hits me. I raised my daughter by myself. I work and I raise her alone. It is hard when my taxes go up. It is hard for many people when their taxes go up. So I cannot even begin to imagine us raising taxes this year after we have done it for the past couple of years for the citizen of this city.
Counselor?
I could make my bank account look really great. I could just ignore the fact that, maybe the brakes on my car are making some noise. I could ignore the fact that there's holes in my clothes. I could, eat ramen noodles every night. I could do all those things and put a lot of money in my bank account, but frankly, that's no way to run a city. There are certain things that are necessary expenses. The vast majority of what the city does is really not an option. I mean, we can argue around the edges, but, like I said before, paving the roads, the police department, the fire department, those are all essential services. Those things are not a choice. And this council voted unanimously on the union contracts that we are committed to. Not a single person on this council voted against any one of those contracts. So we've already committed ourselves to that spending, including yourself, Councilor. We know that spending is coming, and if we don't plan for the revenue to pay for the spending that we have already committed ourselves to, then we're not doing our job.
Is there anybody else who would like to comment on this motion? I will move to a vote on the motion. All in favor? Opposed? Motion fails, and now we are back to the budget as it was first presented when we came in. Is there any need for further discussion, or are we ready for a vote? Ready for a vote? Okay. Okay, could I get a roll call, please?
Counselor Morris?
Yes.
Counselor Bopia?
No.
Counselor Smith? Yes. Counselor Mayu?
Yes.
Counselor Coelho?
Yes.
Counselor Tate?
Yes.
Counselor Thomas?
No.
The vote is 5 in favor, 2 opposed.
And there is no further business. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion made.
Thank you.